Charles Fraser, The Kidnapping of Dr. Watson, The Adventures of the Elderly Sherlock Holmes, Episode 8. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go audio production. I had made it my habit to take an early morning stroll through the nearby Regent's Park right after getting up, while Holmes was usually still asleep. I enjoyed the peaceful quiet that still prevailed at this hour. No hectic bustle of the many carriages and motor cars, just the chirping of birds whilst the rising sun fought for its place in the sky. My way home typically led me past the Smith family's bakery. There I would purchase 4 rolls daily, thus providing for the upcoming breakfast that Holmes and I shared. Today was no different. I strolled through the park whilst pulling my scarf tighter around my neck and tugging my hat lower over my face. The January wind blew ice cold in these early morning hours, yet its biting chill made nature's beauty all the more striking. Tiny ice crystals had settled on the leaves and grasses, sparkling enchantingly in the morning sun. My thoughts drifted to my late wife Caroline. Oh, how she had loved this season! As downhearted as she might have been at Christmas and New Year, it was as if every January she would find renewed hope, gathering fresh strength alongside the frozen nature and looking forward to spring with it. Caroline and I would go for walks during this season as often as we could. I remember clearly how she would stop at every other bush to admire the ice crystals. "Look, John," she would say to me, "it looks as though they're all tiny diamonds," and each time she would smile at me in such a way that she herself outshone the ice crystals. I stopped and gently reached out my hand towards the ice crystal on the bush in front of me. But suddenly, before I knew what was happening, everything went dark. Someone must have pulled something over my head. A sack, perhaps? I thrashed about wildly, but my arms and hands were already being seized. I tried to keep moving whilst kicking out at the same time, but then I felt a sharp, brief pain at my right temple, and I sensed myself slowly collapsing. Slowly, I regained consciousness. I kept my eyes closed and became aware that I was lying on something hard. My skull was throbbing, and nausea was gradually rising within me. I was freezing. It was cold. A mighty bell toll rang out, causing me to abruptly open my eyes. I felt the dizziness that immediately overcame me and clutched at the bed on which I lay. I was at least satisfied to find that my hands weren't bound. My gaze swept across my surroundings. Prison bars? Was I in a prison cell? But in which one? And why? It was draughty, damp and musty, and it seemed to me this was the most forsaken place on earth. Surely no one had been here for a very long time. "Hello?" I asked cautiously and hoarsely, but received no answer. Was I being watched? Was someone here? I clasped my head with both hands and held it tight. It felt ready to burst from the blow and the many unanswered questions. My mouth was dry. I was terribly thirsty. Slowly, I tried to gather my limbs and sit up. I examined my surroundings once more. There wasn't much space here. 3 meters by 2 at most. The uncomfortable pallet that served as a bed, made of bare wooden beams, took up much of the space. Someone had at least been kind enough to leave a thin woolen blanket on the pallet. And then I saw it. A water bottle and a dry roll had also been left for me. Roll! Holmes! The roll suddenly made me think of Holmes, who by now would surely be waiting for my arrival, and that of the rolls I always brought back. But how the devil was Holmes supposed to find me here? Meanwhile, Holmes knocked at Alice Miller's door, the niece of the late Mrs Hudson, and thus Holmes's new landlady. "Mr Holmes, how are you? Can I do anything for you? You look worried." Alice greeted Holmes kindly. "Good day, Alice. Have you seen Dr. Watson recently?" "I saw him early this morning when he left the house for his daily walk." "Why? Has he not returned yet?" asked Alice, immediately becoming quite agitated. "No, he hasn't. I'm slowly beginning to worry. It's well past noon. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes he meets a former patient and loses track of time. But now, this isn't like Dr. Watson at all, especially since he knows I'm waiting for his bread rolls." Alice raised an eyebrow and looked at Holmes askance. "Well then, what do you suggest?" "I would like to retrace Watson's walking route," said Holmes, swinging his walking stick. "Would you care to join me, provided your maternal duties permit? The children are at my sister's this weekend. Eddy and I wanted to have a fancy dinner out again, so yes, I'd love to accompany you." And with that, Alice grabbed her coat, linked arms with Holmes, and pulled the door shut behind her. "Do you think the old doctor won't freeze to death on us?" asked the woman. The man shook his head. "Of course not. We even left him an extra blanket. Besides, the prison walls are quite thick. No scream can escape from there, so the cold shouldn't get in too quickly either. Don't worry, darling. Soon we won't have to concern ourselves with such trivialities." The man pulled the woman close and kissed her passionately. She allowed it for a few seconds, then pushed him away. "I don't want to become a murderer because of this. Do you understand that, Charlie? He won't die that quickly, and even if he does, what sort of life expectancy do you think he would have had anyway? We're probably doing him a favour." The man began to laugh loudly. "You can't possibly believe that yourself," the woman cried out indignantly. "But darling," the man tried to calm his agitated wife, "nothing will happen to him. Now relax and think about the millions we'll earn through our heist. We'll be richer than George himself. No wonder, after we've stolen all his jewels." The man burst out laughing again. His wife joined in his laughter, and they kissed once more. Sherlock Holmes and Alice had arrived at Regent's Park. Holmes's attention remained fixed on the ground, whilst Alice glanced about anxiously. "Have you found a lead yet? Do you already know what happened to Dr. Watson?" Alice asked impatiently. Holmes rolled his eyes in mild irritation. "Do you think it's written here in the snow?" "Yes, that's exactly what I believe," Alice exclaimed triumphantly. "Look, Mr. Holmes, here!" She pointed excitedly at a collection of footprints. Holmes stopped abruptly and hesitantly dropped to his knees. "You might be right about that." "Well, what do you think?" Alice could barely contain her excitement. "Is that a trail?" "Quite possible. It appears there was a struggle here. Do you see the different impressions? As far as I can make out, the tracks involved belong to 2 men and a woman." "And what about these here?" Alice pointed to 2 different smaller prints. "Those belong to children," Holmes explained. "It's already afternoon. We're rather fortunate to be able to find anything at all in the snow. Are you quite certain that this is Dr. Watson's footprint?" "Most likely. Here we have a size 8.5 shoe, which is rather small for a man. I myself wear a size 10. However, Dr. Watson wears size 8.5. The second male footprint we can see here is size 9.5. The third footprint belongs to a lady and is size 4. You can see quite clearly how the size 9.5 and 4 approach the size 8.5, which is Dr. Watson's. The tracks of size 9.5 and size 4 also lead away together, whereas the size 8.5 tracks are completely missing. Therefore, I suspect that the man and woman must have carried Dr. Watson away. However, from the tracks, I cannot determine whether there was actually a struggle or if Dr. Watson merely felt unwell and the man and woman rushed to his aid. And what do you suggest now? You, my dear Alice, check all the hospitals and infirmaries. I, however, will immediately visit Inspector Wolford and explain the situation to him. Then let's not waste any time. Alice gave Holmes a quick nod. Good luck! And she was gone. My head was throbbing. My old war wounds in my shoulder and leg were aching, and I was freezing. Though my sense of time had never been the best, thanks to the bell chimes, I at least knew exactly what time it was. I felt quite anxious at the mere thought of having to endure the cold night hours in here. My water bottle was also running low, and my stomach was growling. Apart from the stale roll that had been generously placed before me, I hadn't eaten anything today. I was still hoping my presumed kidnappers would soon appear and provide me with at least some blankets and additional provisions. At least I believed I knew where I was. This dreadful bell ringing sounded so close, as if I were in the bell tower itself. And then it occurred to me that this was probably exactly the case. The bell was certainly Big Ben. That much was clear. Moreover, I recalled Holmes once telling me about a prison in the tower itself. I believed I remembered that it hadn't been used since the 1880s. Should my assumption prove correct, and I was quite sure it would, it was highly unlikely that anyone would hear my calls for help, let alone come to my rescue. I began pacing up and down in the tiny cell to keep my limbs reasonably warm. At the same time, I tried to remember the moment of my abduction. Did I know the perpetrators? No. I could ponder all I liked, but I couldn't recall catching even a glimpse of one or any of the culprits. I don't believe I dropped anything either that might have left Holmes a clue, should he be searching for me. I became increasingly aware of how hopeless my situation was. It was late in the evening when Alice finally returned to Baker Street, where her husband Eddy and Sherlock Holmes were anxiously awaiting her. But Alice merely shook her head. Nothing. I've checked all the hospitals and infirmaries, but there's no trace of Dr. Watson. Judging by your looks, he hasn't returned home in the meantime. Now it was Holmes's turn to shake his head dejectedly and deny it. At least I was able to meet Inspector Wolford straight away at the station. He immediately issued a search warrant for Watson and instructed every officer to keep both eyes and ears open. Of course, there's not much more he can do at the moment. "And now what?" asked Alice. "There's nothing more we can do at the moment," Holmes stated soberly. "It's pitch black, and we don't even know where to begin looking. The only thing we're certain of now is that Watson has been kidnapped." "Are you really sure about that?" Eddy pressed. "I mean, what reason would there be to kidnap the doctor?" "At present, I cannot see the reason for it either, but there must be one. We can do nothing else but wait until tomorrow." "Perhaps tomorrow we'll receive a ransom demand for our good doctor," Eddy speculated. "I don't think so. Watson's kidnapping must have been a planned act. They had to know his habits and be aware that the doctor takes his morning walks in the park. Anyone who knows all this would also know that there isn't much ransom money to be demanded here." "Perhaps Dr. Watson simply witnessed another crime and was kidnapped because of it," said Alice. "That thought isn't entirely wrong, but I believe if that were the case, they would have disposed of the doctor on the spot. Why go to the trouble of kidnapping him?" "There's probably some truth in that," Alice admitted ruefully. "Let's go to bed, recharge our batteries and hope for tomorrow." "Don't you think we should check on the doctor once more?" asked the woman to her husband, who was lying beside her in bed and had already settled into his sleeping position. "I'm nearly asleep. Stop this nonsense and shut your eyes," the man snapped at her. "I just mean, it's terribly cold out there. I don't think that thin blanket is enough." With a snort, the man rolled onto his back again and patted his wife. "The man fought in the war. He's used to far worse. Besides, I've already explained to you that the thick walls keep out quite a bit of cold. Now, get some sleep at last." "But he must be hungry and thirsty. We should have left him much more food and drink straight away. You said you'd do that in the evening, but you didn't," his wife noted reproachfully. "The man is elderly. You don't need as much at that age. I promise you, first thing tomorrow morning, I'll make up for it and bring the doctor some provisions. Good night, darling," said the man in an irritated tone. But his wife wasn't giving up that easily. "We haven't even made sure that he's all right. Perhaps he's still unconscious from the blow to his head and might be dying this very moment." "Now I've had quite enough of this," shouted the man. "The doctor is a kidnapping victim, not your pet. He'll survive. And if I hear one more word from you, I swear you'll be the next one in the tower. We've got a demanding day ahead of us tomorrow. Everything needs to go smoothly. I need you well rested and fully alert. Do you hear me?" The man turned onto his side and fell asleep within minutes, while his wife lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Holmes found no sleep that night either. In his mind, he kept going over the traces at the presumed crime scene again and again, yet reached no further insight. Why on earth had Watson been kidnapped? There had to be a plausible reason for it. He turned onto his other side, but that position didn't seem any more comfortable either. Finally, dawn began to break. He quickly slipped into his clothes and ventured out into the bitterly cold morning. He had to return to the crime scene once more. Perhaps he had missed something after all. Not only was the chattering of my teeth keeping me awake that night, I could no longer feel my toes and fingers. As a doctor, I knew all too well how death by freezing progressed. I forced myself with all my might not to give in to the alluring, salvation-promising, yet deadly sleep. I limped back and forth in the cell and forced myself to do squats alternately. The resulting pain in my leg, marked by injury and impending frostbite, was most welcome. It kept me from falling asleep while standing. I listened for the next toll of the bell, counted the minutes and hours aloud, and yearned for the morning with its first warming rays of sunlight. "Have you taken leave of your senses?" Alice scolded Holmes as he returned dejectedly to Baker Street. "Do you have any idea how worried I've been?" "No, I suppose not. Otherwise you wouldn't have done it." "Alice, I am not one of your children," Holmes snapped at her harshly. Alice flinched. "I do apologise. You're quite right, of course. But I was truly terribly worried about you. All sorts of dreadful thoughts crossed my mind, like you being kidnapped as well." "By whom? By aliens?" Holmes joked, although he wasn't really in the mood for it. "You went to Regent's Park again, am I right?" asked Alice. Holmes nodded. "I had hoped to have overlooked something that might help us make progress. This doing nothing and waiting is taking its toll on me. I've reached a point where I don't know how to proceed. I can't remember ever feeling like this in the countless cases that Watson and I solved together." Holmes let his shoulders droop dejectedly. Alice moved close to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Holmes, you are the most brilliant detective I know, the most brilliant there has ever been. I am certain you will solve this case too. I trust in that. You should too." "Thank you, Alice," said Holmes dejectedly. "Come on, let's go together to Inspector Woolford at the station. Perhaps there's something new. Better than sitting around here anyway." I sat on the cot, having removed my shoes and socks. Carefully and in pain, I massaged my feet. My toes had long since turned blue and stubbornly refused to return to a more rosy hue. Thirst and hunger tormented me. My stomach had long given up making itself known through loud growling. Rather, it was beginning to cause increasingly extreme pain. My throat was severely parched, and swallowing was very difficult. I was quite certain I wouldn't survive another night. I prayed for my kidnappers to appear, but even more so for Holmes to show up, though I didn't really believe in the latter. "Holmes, where are you?" The woman and the man sat together at the breakfast table. He tucked in heartily, while she nibbled listlessly at her toast. "Darling, you must eat," he said. "The day has finally arrived. From tomorrow onwards, we'll both be filthy rich, so eat up and stay focused." "When are you taking food to the doctor?" she asked instead. "As soon as we've finished our final preparations," he assured her. "That Watson can certainly hold out until then, rest assured." "And what preparations would those be?" she asked. "Let's go through the most important pieces of jewellery one more time. We won't have forever after all. Besides, we obviously can't carry everything." "Well," said the man. The woman replied with boredom. "But we've been through this countless times already. The actual crown of state is the St. Edward's crown. You can recognise it by the golden fleur-de-lis. It's adorned with countless precious stones and pearls, and weighs nearly 5 pounds. The imperial state crown is made of silver and set with thousands of diamonds. The imperial crown of India is decorated with emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and an extremely precious ruby. We mustn't forget the diadem and the sceptre with the cross, which bears the 530-carat Cullinan diamond, as well as the ivory sceptre. The 3 rings are easy to carry and extremely valuable, so we'll take those too, of course. The jewelled sword of state is the most beautiful and valuable. We'll need to find a way to carry that as well, along with the sovereign's orb. I'd say once we have all of that, we've succeeded, and can leave the rest behind." "Quite right, my darling. We wouldn't want dear old George to be left penniless." The man laughed loudly again and took a pleasurable bite of his toast. Big Ben struck 12 noon. The sun must have been high on the horizon, sending out its warm, soothing rays. Unfortunately, I can't enjoy any of that, I thought to myself. I could only hope that it would warm the thick stone walls a bit, though that wouldn't really help me much either. So I decided to lie down again on the hard cot. I pulled the sparse blanket over myself and closed my eyes. I felt my toes slowly beginning to tingle again. I reckoned it would be wisest to get some sleep. Should I face another night like the last one, I would absolutely need to stay awake to avoid freezing to death as I feared. I closed my eyes and, despite the gnawing hunger and the pain in my stomach, not to mention my parched throat, I fell asleep within minutes. "Come back tomorrow morning. We can only officially report Dr. Watson as missing after 48 hours. This is ridiculous," Alice scolded. "Inspector Wolford's hands are tied. He's already doing what he can," said Holmes. "And you're satisfied with that?" "As far as Scotland Yard is concerned, yes. I shall retire and comb through yesterday's and today's newspapers." "I'll help you, of course," said Alice, pushing past Holmes through the front door. "Ladies first," Holmes said curtly. The man and woman arrived punctually near the tower. Both were carrying large bags. Big Ben struck 9:45 p.m. when the man and woman, hidden behind a bush, waited for the arrival of the crown jeweller. At 5 minutes to 10, Mr. Garrard walked right past them and approached the tower without noticing the pair. "Help! Please help!" the woman shouted at the top of her voice. Mr. Garrard immediately stopped in his tracks and turned his gaze searchingly towards the cry for help. "Here! Over here!" called the woman again. Mr. Garrard didn't hesitate, rushing towards the bushes to help the woman, but before he could reach his destination, he was already overpowered by the man. "What do you want from me? Let me go at once!" cried Mr. Garrard, filled with fear, but the man only pressed him more firmly to the ground and dug his knee into his back. "Now listen to me very carefully. You will take my wife into the tower with you. You will tell the guards that this year you have been granted permission for an assistant to help clean the crown jewels. You will not call for help, nor make any ambiguous gestures. You will do exactly as my wife tells you." "I most certainly will not do that. You cannot force me," cried Mr. Garrard. "Oh yes, we can," said the man smugly. "We know where you live, which bed your son was sleeping in just an hour ago, and we also know which book your wife was holding until recently. However, now, your son is no longer sleeping, and your wife is no longer reading her book. Now they're both anxiously waiting for Daddy to do everything right, so they can be released as quickly as possible from the dark, cold cellar where we've locked them up." Mr. Garrard's sigh sounded so anguished that it sent chills down the woman's spine. Of course, all of this was a lie. Mrs. Garrard and their son were safely tucked away in their home, but Mr. Garrard didn't know that. As supposed proof, the man held a scarf in front of Mr. Garrard's face, his wife's favourite scarf, which she had worn earlier that day. Mr. Garrard couldn't possibly know that it was merely an inexpensive duplicate, which hadn't been particularly difficult to obtain. "You can let me go," said Mr. Garrard through gritted teeth. "I'll do what you want." Slowly, the man released Mr. Garrard. He cautiously straightened up and brushed the snow and dirt from his clothes. Then he turned to the woman. "So, I'm supposed to present you as my assistant?" The woman nodded. Mr. Garrard snorted with contempt. "And what else?" "That's none of your concern for now. We'll take this one step at a time," said the woman. "And think of your wife and son," the man shouted after them as the court jeweller and the woman disappeared towards the tower. The man waited approximately 15 minutes before he too made his way towards the tower. He crept in a crouched position to the rear of the building. He didn't have to wait long before a bundle of clothes was thrown down to him. He quickly snatched it and withdrew. Behind the bushes, he changed his clothes for the discarded uniform of a guard. While changing, he uttered many blasphemies about the biting cold. Briefly, he thought about poor Dr. Watson, who still had to languish in prison. If he was still alive, that is. But the prospect of his imminent wealth, quickly made thoughts of Dr. Watson fade away. Disguised as a bodyguard, he strode straight towards the tower's entrance gate. There, his wife and the crown jeweller, Mr. Garrard, were already waiting for him. Mr. Garrard indicated that the man was the additional guard he had requested, and they passed through security without delay. They strode briskly into the jewel house, passing through various checkpoints, including military posts. However, in Mr. Garrard's presence, they encountered no further difficulties. When the man caught his first glimpse of the precious crown jewels, it seemed as though all his dreams were coming true. "Quick, darling! Let's gather everything up and get it out of here," called out the man excitedly. "And how exactly did you envision that? Do you really believe you can stuff your pockets here and casually stroll past the guards? Does the phrase body search mean anything to you?" asked Mr. Garrard irritably. "We'll get this junk out the same way this absolutely wonderful disguise previously found its way in here." The man grinned from ear to ear. The man and woman ignored Garrard and eagerly began gathering everything they had planned to take. But suddenly, the door was violently kicked open, and they found themselves surrounded by a cluster of armed guards. The woman raised her hands in complete bewilderment, whilst her husband tossed aside the bulging bag and instead seized control of Mr. Garrard. With a trembling hand, he held his knife to his throat and shouted, "Not one step closer, or you'll need to find yourselves a new crown jeweller." A voice rose from among the armed guards. "You didn't seriously believe you could simply march into the tower and steal the crown jewels, did you? We had you under surveillance the moment this woman entered the tower in Mr. Garrard's company. How could anyone be so remarkably brazen? Drop the knife. You haven't got the slightest chance, and I'm only telling you this once." The man closed his eyes for a brief moment, and one could virtually see that he had made his decision. "No, Charlie, no!" she screamed at the top of her lungs and lunged at her husband just as the gunfire erupted. Mr. Garrard stood motionless. The man collapsed with his mouth wide open and a distorted gaze until he hit the ground dead. The woman lay covered in blood a few metres away from her husband. "Come on, Alice, do hurry up!" Impatiently, Sherlock Holmes practically dragged Alice behind him. "Inspector Wolford said 48 hours and they're up now." Holmes and Alice entered the police headquarters and found themselves facing a weary-looking Inspector Wolford. "What happened?" asked Holmes without any greeting formalities or introduction. "Haven't you heard yet? There was an attempt to steal the crown jewels last night." "No, that completely passed me by. I haven't had the pleasure of reading the morning paper yet," said Holmes. "The attempt was a failure?" "Of course," Inspector Wolford stated. "But whenever people get hurt, the operation is always tragic." "Has anyone been injured?" Holmes wanted to know. "The perpetrator was shot dead by the security guards, and his wife is in hospital with severe injuries. It's not yet clear whether she'll pull through." Holmes pricked up his ears. "A man and a woman, you say?" "Quite right," replied the inspector. Holmes practically rushed towards Inspector Wolford. "Take me to the hospital at once." "What's going on? Would you mind explaining it to me?" "The man and woman who carried out the theft of the crown jewels have also kidnapped Dr. Watson. I found clear traces of 2 perpetrators, 1 male, 1 female." "And how did you come to the conclusion that they are one and the same?" Inspector Wolford wanted to know. "The kidnapping of Dr. Watson was meant as a diversionary tactic against me. Do you understand? If I'm busy looking for Watson, I can't simultaneously pursue 2 jewel thieves. Quick, we must question the woman before it's too late." Hardly having arrived at the hospital, Inspector Wolford, followed by Sherlock Holmes and Alice, stormed into the perpetrator's hospital room. "Stop!" called the nurse on duty. "Halt right there! Are you mad? You can't just barge in here. The patient is not in any condition to receive visitors." "This is not a visit, but an interrogation. Please clear the way," Holmes demanded of the nurse. "Impossible!" she retorted indignantly. "The woman is fighting for her life." "My good lady, a man has been kidnapped by this very patient of yours, and nobody knows his whereabouts. If I cannot conduct this interrogation, That man will ultimately be fighting for his life as well, and he will most certainly lose that fight. Can you live with that on your conscience?" Hesitantly, the nurse stepped aside, but it was too late. The woman's heart had already stopped beating. Dejected, Holmes, Inspector Walford, and Alice, who was on the verge of tears, returned to the police station. "Whatever shall we do? We'll never find Dr. Watson," Alice sobbed. "I will immediately assign a special unit to search for Watson. I promise you, we will leave no stone unturned in all of London," said Inspector Walford. "But that doesn't make any sense. We must think of something else. Do you have any names for me? Where did the two perpetrators work? Associates? Relatives? Hobbies? Places they like to visit? Anything?" Holmes wanted to know. "I don't know how this will help you, but we were able to identify the woman as Annie Winter. She was quite knowledgeable about jewellery and valuables in general. She worked part-time at an antiques dealer and pawnbrokers." "And what about the man? I assume her partner or husband. What do we know about him?" "Unfortunately, nothing yet, except that he was apparently called Charlie. We haven't been able to locate any of Annie Winter's relatives who knew anything about a boyfriend. Have them bring you the pawnbroker's books and records. We might find a connection there. And Inspector Walford, make haste. I fear every minute counts." Barely an hour later, Holmes, Alice, Inspector Walford, and all available officers were poring over the pawnbroker's records. "We're looking for all entries with the name Charlie or Charles. First name, middle name, surname, it doesn't matter. Show me everything," Holmes ordered. Countless notes and records were presented to Holmes, but he kept shaking his head and asked them to keep searching. "Here we have a record from approximately 3 years ago. And now look at this." Alice excitedly placed the book before Holmes. "Charles Lindemann, and there's even an employer noted. Employed under the House of Windsor." "We've got him!" Holmes exclaimed enthusiastically. "Inspector Walford, contact the King's office. Have them search the payroll immediately for a Charles Lindemann and get confirmation about which department he was employed in." Sherlock Holmes did not have to wait long. Less than half an hour later, an officer rushed into the office and announced excitedly, "Mr. Holmes, Charles Lindemann, he was one of the keepers of the Great Clock. Big Ben, the abandoned prison in the tower. I bet Dr. Watson is there. What a brilliant hiding place." "Come along, Holmes," Alice snapped at the old detective. "There will be plenty of time later to admire the perpetrator." The heavy iron door of the tiny prison cell was kicked open with force, but I was no longer aware of it. I had long since lost consciousness. The previous night had quite literally rolled over me ice cold. Hunger and thirst did the rest. I couldn't tell whether I was about to die of thirst or freeze to death. In the end, it didn't matter anyway. The result would have been the same. You were listening to Charles Fraser, The Kidnapping of Dr. Watson, The Adventures of the Elderly Sherlock Holmes, Episode 8. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go audio production.